indicated by the illuminated exit sign. In case of a building evacuation, please walk, do not run, to the nearest exit. Also, please turn off all electronic devices. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dan Day. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Communications here at Princeton University. It is my great pleasure today to preside at this news conference at which we celebrate the 2015 Nobel laureate in economic sciences, Angus Deaton. Before we begin our program, I'd like to give just a few quick instructions on how this news conference will work. We will start with remarks by the president of Princeton University, Christopher Eisgruber, and then by Cecilia Rouse, Dean of the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, and by Janet Curry, Chair of the Department of Economics. After that, Professor Deaton will speak, and when he concludes, we'll open the floor to questions from the news media. I will call upon each member of the media, and a runner will bring you a microphone so everyone in the audience can hear your question. We are also receiving questions remotely from members of the media who are unable to be here in person, and I will relay a few of those questions to Angus as we go. Beyond the media, we have a good number of faculty, students, and staff here at Richardson Auditorium, and depending on the number of questions from the media, we're going to try to make time to have your questions answered as well. And now, I am privileged to present to you the 20th president of Princeton University, Christopher Eisgruber.
Thank you, Dan. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this press conference and to what is obviously an extraordinarily happy occasion on the Princeton University campus. As Dan has said, joining me here on stage are the Dean of the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, Cecilia Rouse, the Chair of the Department of Economics, Janet Curry, and of course the man of the hour, the 2015 Nobel laureate in economic sciences, Professor Angus Deaton. Professor Deaton's biography is now known to the world, so I will recite the details only briefly so that we can spend as much time as possible hearing from him. Angus Deaton is the Dwight D. Eisenhower Professor of International Affairs and Professor of Economics and International Affairs at the Woodrow Wilson School and in the Economics Department, a position he has now held for more than 30 years. Born in Edinburgh, Scotland, Angus received his BA, MA, and PhD, each in economics, from the University of Cambridge. He taught at the University of Bristol from 1976 until 1983, when he came to Princeton. Angus's early scholarship analyzed the evolution of consumer demand as it related to development economics, focusing on the United Kingdom in the first 70 years of the 20th century. For this work, which used a novel way of modeling consumer demand, he was in 1978 awarded the inaugural Frisch Medal, an award given every 2 years by the Econometric Society to the author of an applied economics paper published in the economics journal Econometrica. In recent years, his scholarship has expanded to cover broader topics within economics, including consumer savings, measurement of economic well-being and poverty, and health and development economics. Angus is a corresponding fellow of the British Academy and a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and of the Econometric Society. He is also a distinguished fellow of the American Economic Association, and in 2009, he served as that association's president. In 2012, he was awarded the BBVA Foundation Frontiers of Knowledge Award. In April 2014, he was elected a member of the American Philosophical Society, and in April of this year, he was elected a member of the National Academy of Sciences. Since 1996, he has published his popular Letter from America every 6 months in the Royal Economic Society's newsletter. On a more personal note, let me add that Angus is a leader not only in his field, but on this campus. He has been a great mentor to many students at Princeton, including our provost, David Lee, who is sitting here in the front row, who was telling me this morning about his experiences as a student in Angus's class. Dave also said that Angus is one of those people who animate conversations around the department, so that Dave, when teaching his own classes, would often find himself responding to students asking, "What do you think of Deaton's view?" I myself first met Angus shortly after I joined the Woodrow Wilson School faculty and was immediately impressed with his leadership in the school and his willingness to tackle important questions. His book, The Great Escape, which is now selling out rapidly at bookstores everywhere, is among the best that I've read. In the last few years, and I'm pleased to say that I've not only been recommending it to people even before this award, but also giving it as a gift to our alumni. I now have another reason to give away many more copies of the book. I am thrilled that this year's Nobel Prize was awarded to someone who is both a great economist and a great Princetonian. Let me now ask Dean Rouse and Professor Curry to say a few words if they like, and we will then hear from this year's Nobel laureate. Dean Rouse.
So the very first email I received this morning was from Ann Case, who had the heads up. Can't tell you why, but just a heads up. But another one of the first emails I received this morning was from a former student of Angus's who heard the amazing news, and she wrote, "Dear Cece, am over the moon with the news about Angus Deaton. What an honor for the school, and I cannot think of a more deserving man. He always stood out as the best professor I had, who challenged and pushed me to achieve the impossible. You must all be so proud." This sentiment captures our feelings at the Woodrow School just so perfectly. For over 30 years, Angus has contributed to the intellectual life of the school in so many different ways. As noted by the student, he is a devoted teacher who has pushed students to be better than they thought they were. He is tough, for sure, but he is empathetic and patient. As a scholar, he is focused on well-being, poverty, inequality, the determinants of health in rich and poor countries, to name just a few topics. His paper on happiness and well-being has been quoted pretty much everywhere. Angus's scholarship is profound, but his passion to shed light on people's real-life experiences ensures that it doesn't get stuck in the ivory tower. He has that rare ability to produce deep analytical research and contextualize it with the everyday. He's a giant in his field, but not one to wear that on his sleeve. He's a true gentleman. He's kind to colleagues, students, and staff equally, and respected by all. He's also a wonderful friend, and Angus, I couldn't be more proud. Congratulations. You do the school so very proud. Thank you.
So I'm also delighted to be here and be able to congratulate Angus, both as chair of economics and director of the Center for Health and Wellbeing in the Woodrow Wilson School. It's a really great day for all of your colleagues and your former students, and I'm also one of them. As everyone's heard by now, Angus received the prize for his work on consumption, poverty, and welfare. More than anyone else, he's helped us to understand that the choices of individual consumers aggregate to affect the economy as a whole. And as the Nobel Prize Committee noted, Angus taught us we must first understand the impact of individual behavior if we're to design economic policy that promotes welfare and reduces poverty. Many of us first learned about the analysis of household surveys from the work in his book, Economics and Human Behavior with John Muehlbauer. And while Angus pioneered techniques for analyzing huge household surveys as they first became available around the world, those of us who are his colleagues appreciated not only his intellect, but his motivation for doing so, the fact that, in his own words, he feels there's a real moral urgency to understanding how people behave and what we should or might be able to do about it. Looking at the people behind the numbers has led him to consider the relationship between income and calories consumed, allocation of resources within the household, consumption and saving over the life cycle, and most recently, the impact of income on well-being. No one could spend time with Angus without seeing his passion for measurement and really understanding the details of how the numbers we work with every day are put together. And we've all been at the wrong end of the healthy skepticism that such deep knowledge about where the numbers come from often engenders. Angus's work on measuring purchasing power parity and the difficulties involved in making comparisons of poverty rates both across time and across countries stands out as especially important in this regard. All of these concerns were brought together in his most recent book, The Great Escape, which, without minimizing the depth of poverty and human suffering that remains, nonetheless focuses on the powerful message of how much humanity has advanced in the past 250 years. One of the reviewers noted, Deaton's arguments, written in an elegant and accessible style, are powerful and challenge conventional opinions. And I thought, what a great summary of Angus himself in a nutshell. I just want to say one more thing, which is actually what I told the New York Times this morning when they called and asked me, what would I say to somebody about what to expect of Angus as a dinner party companion? It's like people ask all sorts of strange things. So what I told them, which I think is the truth, I said he's enormously funny, witty, well-read, frighteningly erudite, and very good company. So without further ado, let's hear from the man himself.
Thank you. Thank you all. You're incredibly generous. You don't exactly get a lot of preparation for this. So I'm not quite sure. I see my friend Chris Sims sitting here, and I think I asked him to come up and hold my hand and tell me how he did it, how well he did it. And people keep congratulating me today, and I keep thinking, for what? And it's really because it takes a long time to sink in, and it's really hard to believe that, I'm not going to pinch myself and wake up, and there will be no phone call, and all the rest of it. So I'm slowly getting used to it. I don't want to say very much, but I just do want to say a few things. One is, I really want to thank Princeton for what it's done for me and for the place it's provided me to work, for my amazing colleagues over the years. And it also provided what I was looking for when I came here from Britain, which was a place where you could work without having to worry about all the extraneous things that go on in so many universities. And that's been a truly wonderful experience for me in Princeton as a whole. Wonderful graduate students, wonderful colleagues. I wanted to say a little bit, too, about the Woodrow Wilson School, because for me, the Woodrow Wilson School is one of the parts about this that I like the most, that Nobel laureates don't usually come from public policy schools, and that the Woodrow Wilson School has a very different way of going about its business than most other public policy schools, in that it really believes in academic excellence, that all of us who are economists in the school are members of one of the world's best economics departments. And that I think, if I can count right, this is probably the third Nobel Prize that has come to the Woodrow Wilson School, which is 3 more than pretty much anywhere else, and many orders of magnitude proportionately more than anywhere else. And it's a model that many people have challenged over the years, and the feeling that to some extent it ties our hands. It's hard to have policy practitioners, people really interested in policy. But if you look back at the record, I just don't think that's true. And there have been terrific people. My ex-colleague Ben Bernanke will be talking here next week. Alan Kruger. There's just a whole host of people who've come up through the Woodrow Wilson School, met the highest standards of academic achievement. And I think this is like a Nobel Prize to the Woodrow Wilson School to some extent, and I think that's a truly wonderful thing. I'll just say a little bit about my own work and what I've always thought that I was unlikely to win this prize because I've never really had a field in that I work in a lot of different things. And I remember once when I was thinking about a job somewhere else, people said to me, how come you don't have a field? Can't you settle down? And the answer is I never really have settled down, and I've worked on a lot of different things. And I always thought that the Nobel Committee, whose charter is to make an award for some specific piece of work, would therefore have a very hard time seeing an integrated whole in what I've done. I thought they did an amazing job this morning. And I sort of watched the video and I thought, boy, so that's what I've been doing all these years. And there is this extraordinary ability to sort of see a pattern that was not apparent at the time. So I think for me, you know, my original mentor, the person I very first worked with many, many years ago, was Richard Stone in Cambridge, who got the Nobel Prize, I think, in 1984 for his work on national income accounting, and he worked with Keynes and with James Meade in the British Treasury during the Second World War, figuring out how to pay for the war. And I wanted to be like him in many, many ways. And so I thought a lot about him. And I don't think measurement has certainly not been excluded from the prizes, but I feel passionately about measurement, about how difficult it is, about how much theory and conceptualization is involved in measurement, and indeed how much politics is involved in measurement. And that, to me, is the center of what I do, trying to be careful and honest about measurement, even if you're forced to change your mind, sometimes in very uncomfortable places. That, to me, is really very important. And I guess the other thing is, to me, the breadth is important in and of itself. And one of my great joys, and it's so well represented at Princeton, is the breadth with which social sciences has been coming together in recent years. And it was true when I was a kid and was first starting out. It was not true for a really long time. But now, economics is much closer to sociology. It's much closer to politics. It's much closer to demography. It's much closer to philosophy than has been for a really, really long time. And I think in the 70s, there was the feeling that economics was taking over all of these fields. And this is what I think of as the revenge of the empire, that economics was taken over by all of these fields and is all the much better for it. And I think I would like to be known for that. So thank you very much indeed.
All right, we will now take questions from the media assembled here. The press corps is here in the front rows on the left side of the stage as you look at us up here on the stage. Who'd like to follow the Nobel laureate with the first question? If you're not ready, I do have questions queued up from Uruguay and Italy. And seeing no hands immediately raised, I'll relay this one. Professor Deaton from the U.S. Bureau Chief for the Italian daily newspaper La Stampa. You recently said, "My general message is, my measurements tend to show that things are getting better, but there is a lot of work still to be done." Is this true for Europe as well? And what work still needs to be done there in order to achieve stronger economic growth?
Well, that's easier than the question I was asked this morning about how would I solve the European migrant crisis. And I probably give about as good answer. But it's true that I've spent a lot of time arguing that the world is getting to be a much better place, and that over the last 250 years, mankind has been transformed from something close to destitution to where many, many of us have much richer lives in which our talents and capabilities can be more fully expressed. I do tend to emphasize, too, that there's still much to be done, and that, you know, the World Bank the other day announced new poverty figures, which said that the poverty had fallen around 10% of the world's population, and that's wonderful, but there's still 700 million people who are poor, and those are a constant reproach to all of us. And I'm very distressed. I think one of the great threats to us all is the slowing of economic growth in the rich world. And that decade by decade, even before the financial crisis, and the financial crisis made it much, much worse, you've got this slowing growth. And that slowing growth poisons everything. It makes politics much harder. It makes people's lives not as fulfilled as they were, especially the people on the bottom. And if you put that together with the rising inequality, there's many people in the rich world who are really suffering and whose lives are getting worse. And many of them see their lives as getting worse as a consequence of the good things that are happening in the rest of the world. And that could be very, very difficult indeed. And now I'll talk about the migrant crisis, if you like. No, I won't.
All right, thank you. Questions from the press card? Yes, back there.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank you.
Just take us through, if you could, the phone call that you got this morning. Tell us the emotions you felt, how the call happened. Very few of us are ever going to experience this in our lifetimes, so except maybe a couple of other people in this room, I suspect. But take us through what that is like, and what are your plans for the prize itself?
For the what?
The prize itself for the
Oh gosh, I haven't thought about that yet. So I'm not going to answer that. My emotions. I also thought I would never get that phone call in the morning, so I'm not that different from everybody else. So of course, I knew my name was on the list. You see these lists that go around, but there are a lot of names on that list, and many of those names are really good names, and they're people who are enormously worthy of winning this prize. So I always knew it was a possibility, well, not always, but I've known for some time it was a possibility. I never thought it was a very likely event, especially not in any given year. So I was not lying in bed at 6 o'clock this morning thinking, ooh, that phone call should come in the next however long. So that's not what happened, but I was awake. So, you know, I didn't have to pinch myself awake and pretend that, make sure I still was. I wasn't still asleep. So Anne, my colleague and wife here, picked up the phone, and I think I picked it up almost the same time, and there was a very Swedish voice from, which is almost enough, you know, and who said, I would like to speak to Professor Angus Deaton, who there is a very important telephone call for him from Stockholm. So then I had a pretty good idea what it was. And then they said some very nice things about me, which was very nice, including, as I just said, this sort of conception of my life's work, which was sort of a gift in itself. You know, I didn't really know what it was until that moment. I thought, oh, that's a good way of thinking about it. And then they were very keen to make sure that I did not think it was a prank. And I don't know whether this is common. I've never had a prank phone call telling me anything. And of course, as soon as they said that, I thought, oh my God, maybe it is a prank. You know? That's just what they would say. But actually, I know two members of the committee, one of whom was a faculty member here, Per Crisell, and one of whom, Torsten Persson, has been a friend of mine and visited Princeton way back when I first came here 30 years ago, and is a good friend. And I recognized their voices, and I thought, well, if this is a prank, it's a very, very good prank. And they were really, really nice. They said one of the nicest things that's ever been said to me. I must have said thank you about 150 times at that point. And they said, you should stop saying thank you. We want to thank you for burnishing the prize. And I thought, wow, you know, how could someone say nicer to you than that? That's about it. I'm still trying to figure out whether I made the whole thing up, but it was really true.
All right, here's a question, another from overseas. This one from Seminario Biscayta in Uruguay. Professor Deaton, what do you make of the poverty in Latin America? Is it possible for our countries to maintain the current low levels of poverty that we've gained during the last years of economic growth?
Yeah. Latin America is not something I know very much about, but it's a very, very interesting place. The big economies in Latin America, Argentina and Brazil, are two of the economies that have actually been bucking the worldwide inequality trend, and where things have been becoming more equal. And so to many, they've been a model of aggressive, redistributive social programs, which have brought a lot of people out of poverty, have done a lot for public health, and have helped really narrow the gap. And it's somewhat surprising they should be able to do that, because even economies that are much more redistributive than the United States, in Europe, for instance, seem to have been swept aside by the gaining winds of inequality and have sort of given into it. Let me take a sidestep, though, to one of the other things. Poverty is worse measured in Latin America than almost anywhere. And for whatever reason, the surveys on which poverty measurements are based are locked in a very old mode. They ask the wrong questions. There's an enormous amount of evasion. They're asking people about their incomes, and people are frightened to tell people who may be part of the government what their incomes are. And a lot of the incomes that come out of these surveys are just not credible at all. And one of the things I learned from the recent World Bank report on global poverty is just how little they know about Latin America, and I knew that, and it was sort of strongly confirmed.
Okay, let's open it more broadly to questions from the audience at large. Runners, tie your shoes and get ready. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and we will do our best to find you.
Beating them into silence.
Anyone up in the balcony? Oh, yes, there we go. Wait for the microphone. One moment, please.
Congratulations, Professor Deaton. May I ask, what are your future plans?
You know, there's a study that says that movie stars who win Oscars get an extra 5 years on their lives. So I'm hoping this applies to the Nobel Prize, too. I'm sort of looking forward to that. Gosh, I mean, right now, I'm just sort of making it from one place to another. In fact, this morning I wrote to a co-author that I've been working on a paper for far too long. And I said to her, I'm terribly sorry, but our paper is going to be delayed. And she was very brave about it. She said, well, in a good cause, she said. So I would like to get back to work, but I got several emails this morning from previous Nobel laureates who said things like, good luck with time management. So I suspect it's going to be pretty chaotic for a while. So ask me again in a year. I would like to, but let me say one thing, though. The things I'm working on now which is this is a statistical project on how to use randomized controlled trials. And the work that Ann Case and I have been doing on this terrifying increase in middle-aged mortality in the US, which is quite unprecedented, are the two things I've been most excited about for a long time. And maybe it's true that I'm always most excited about what I'm working on now, but that's my plan. I would like to keep on being most excited about what I'm working on now. And maybe that'll help me get that extra 5 years.
Hey, Professor Deaton, here's a question from Capitol Hill in Washington.
Wow.
What are your thoughts on the importance of government funding for social sciences research and any efforts to cut back or eliminate those funds?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of cutting back. I mean, I don't think we get all that much support anyway. I mean, economics used to be heavily funded by the National Science Foundation, and now due to really successful and effective entrepreneurship within the National Institutes of Health, most of us who get government funding now get money from the National Institutes of Health, more than we get money from the National Science Foundation. That's terrific in that, you know, that research I think has been enormously productive in one of the most important parts of our economy, and not just as the economy, but because life and death itself is incredibly important. And this epidemic that Ann Case and I have been working on, this is something that you could figure out every microbe, every biological mechanism in the world, and you would have no handle on this at all because it's behavioral. It's about drug addiction, it's about alcohol addiction, it's about suicides. And those are things that the biology is incredibly important, but the biology is not going to tell us about this thing. And that's what social science funding for health is very good, but we need the NSF too. The NSF supports important data sets. These data sets are small, they're underfunded. And I think throughout the world, I mean, democracies require good data. And I think we're getting to the stage where that is under threat. There are vested interests who don't want to see the data at all, but there are also people who just don't understand how important data is. Mind you, if you go to Africa, you get statistical offices that have, you know, a shed and a guy in it, and there's a lot of these numbers are being made up. But it's been one of the sadnesses in my life that given the enormous amount of aid and money that's being poured into Africa, very little of it has gone to improve data collection. So we don't really know to what extent that work is doing good or not.
All right. Any other questions from out there? Yes, sir. All right, Christian, if you could take the mic.
Congratulations. So I'm a student in math department. I want to ask a question. So what role does mathematics play in your research? Say, what is the most important mathematical technique or idea in your research? Thank you.
I would have given very different answers to that at different points in my career. I mean, I think when I first discovered dynamic programming, I thought dynamic programming was the most important mathematical technique I've ever seen. And, you know, I remember first learning about econometrics and thinking how incredibly important it is. Actually, I think what's been most important for me is a sort of very basic, and actually I think at quite serious level, understanding of what statistics is really about. And I think I was fortunate in that I never went to a PhD program, or, well, I have a PhD, but there was no program. And I never was subjected to learning things in classes. I never really took lectures in economics either. Cambridge was a pretty wild place in those days and gave you a lot of freedom to sort of do what you really wanted to do. And I learned a lot of these things for myself because I was trying to figure things out. And that's always really worked for me. I've always sort of been jealous of people who had the opportunity to go to a graduate program like Princeton's graduate program because the teaching is so fantastic and the material is terrific and you can learn it very, very efficiently. And for many, many years, it was one of my regrets that I didn't get a chance to go to a program like that. But over the years, I've shaded that a little bit because I've learned a lot of that stuff for myself. And learning it for yourself is a way of making mistakes and of seeing things that might not be quite right. And it feeds into my fairly contrarian streak. And you know, there are many, many times in my life I've thought, well, what everybody thinks about this is completely wrong. 99 out of those 100 times, it's me that's completely wrong. You know, I got out of bed the wrong side, or I made a mistake in my code, or whatever. But the one time that's not of the 99 that's when you find real gold. And I think, you know, not being born into a particular tradition helped me that way. I'm not sure it would help other people, but thank you.
Let's see. Yes, in the front center.
Congratulations, Professor Deaton. I was wondering how you perceive the relationship between economic development and access to healthcare, and perhaps how economic development is a prerequisite to providing healthcare, or how economic development is a consequence of providing healthcare.
Right. I'm not really a fan of either one of those simple directions of causation, that, you know, if you get rich, you'll get healthy, or if you get healthy, you'll get rich. I think there's a lot of third factors which are very important for both of them. And the one I've been emphasizing most in my recent work is government capacity. So that governments that are not well enough organized to help their economies grow are typically the ones that can't deliver health care, or who can't regulate health care in a way that makes it really work. I mean, the first thing to realize is health has a lot to do with things that have nothing at all to do with healthcare. I mean, they're to do with vaccinations, they're to do with, I guess vaccination is to do with healthcare, but it doesn't work through the healthcare system. Clean water, drinking water, sanitation is very important, having enough to eat. So there's a tremendous amount of things which are not directly through the healthcare system. And for instance, I mean, I know there's a huge press going on in the world right now to provide universal healthcare insurance to everybody on the planet. I think that's not the right way of going about this. I mean, every Indian has free healthcare in the Constitution of the country, and that's not doing them a whole lot of good because it's not being delivered. And giving people universal health care, the problem is not having the coverage. It's just that when people get to the hospitals, there's no one there to look after them, or the nurses don't show up for their jobs. And it's to do with the government capacity and the ability to make these things work. That said, healthcare is a really, really hard thing. And, you know, we in America should be pretty careful about not preaching healthcare solutions to the rest of the world, because we're not exactly terrific at it ourselves.
Any other questions over there? Yes, and you know, I should have mentioned earlier, if you're asking a question, we'd appreciate it if you would let us know who you are.
Student in the Woodrow Wilson School. I know a lot of your work focuses on South Africa and India, and I was wondering what you thought of the prospects for those countries going forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think the prospects are basically very good, but there obviously are things that can go wrong along the way. So one of the things I wrote about in The Great Escape is that you do get this progress, and there's progress in South Africa, and there's progress in India, but that progress can be interrupted by horrible catastrophes. So, you know, Africa has had the HIV/AIDS epidemic. That's been terribly, hugely affected in South Africa. India has this amazing rate of economic growth, which is now probably the highest in the world for any large country, and yet its children are still terribly malnourished. And while that's getting better, it's not going away very quickly. So we have to find ways of drawing a middle line between those things and you know, turning that growth into something that really works for ordinary people. And just in case I haven't mentioned data for a minute or two, one of the most curious things about India is that the growth you see in the national accounts, you know, the headline figures we see all the time, is actually just not showing up in the surveys that we do of ordinary people. And we don't know where that's going. It's a giant statistical discrepancy. It's probably not hidden money or something like that. And I suspect India is not growing quite as fast as we think it is, and also that poverty is probably falling a little faster than we think it is. But boy, would it be great to sort out these data problems, and no one's really trying. And it's partly because there's huge vested interests in keeping the data systems just exactly the way they are. And that's something one has to think about a lot. Here's Bob.
Yes, in the front.
I'm Robert Cohen in the Woodrow Wilson School, a non-economist. a non-economist colleague of Angus's. Angus, you do not come from a privileged background. Can you say a word about how your background has affected your focus on inequality and poor people?
I'm not sure I have a good answer to that, but it's certainly, I was certainly short of money until long after I was an undergraduate. And I think that experience is something that everyone ought to have. That sounds pretty stupid. It's sort of like saying everybody should be poor, which I don't think at all. But it certainly gives you a perspective on the world that I'm not sure you'll get any very other way. One of the things that it made me very, very conscious of, and I write about this in the introduction to my book, is how much luck, how much importance luck is in people's lives. You know, that if my dad, for instance, had not contracted tuberculosis during the Second World War, which you would not have exactly thought was a stroke of luck, but it saved him from being killed on a commando raid on which everybody else was killed and caused me to exist. It also managed to get him a job. He was a coal miner who had an interest in academia, who had never been allowed to go to school past the age of 12. And he could get a job as a budding white-collar worker because of the manpower shortage during the Second World War. I mean, just an enormous stroke of luck for him. And, you know, in my family, most of the people in my family thought I should be out in the fields and were very uncomfortable with me reading a book at home. And once again, I had the good luck that my father didn't think that way. But I think there are these strokes of luck that if you reran the world, it would be shuffled in a very different way. And that sort of helped me be conscious of the fact that, you know, there but for the grace of God go I. And, you know, you could be where I am. And it's just the luck of the draw. And that's been very important to me, I think. I'd hate to trace it through my work, but anyway.
All right, we have time for one more question in the back.
Going to be the last question. So I'm Chiara Benetolo. I'm a graduate student in comparative literature, actually. So my question would be, where do you see, for example, the importance of culture and economic growth, and like how do you see the linkage? Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know why getting the Nobel Prize enables you to see into the future. I wish it were true. I'd be talking to my stockbroker right now if that were really true. I find it very worrying. And, you know, one of the things, I mean, people worry about climate change, and I think that's a hugely important thing to worry about. It's not something I've worked on or think about very much. I'm hugely worried about inequality. And I think inequality, you know, has gone past the point where it's helping us all get rich, which it can do. And it's really becoming a serious threat. I think inequality makes the climate change thing enormously difficult to handle, both across countries and within countries. And because so many of the people who have so much money are opposed to climate change reform. I also worry about the effects of inequality on politics. Though, you know, politics in the United States is extraordinarily unpredictable, as we all see around us. And, you know, I don't think you can describe it as yet being owned by some small faction. But I do worry about a world in which the rich get to write the rules, which the rest of us then have to obey. So inequality seems to me a very serious threat. I talked a little bit about these people, the people who've suffered from globalization, the people who, I'll talk a little more about this work than Anne and I are doing, but these are the people who, in middle age, have discovered that all the promises they were made about a better life are really not coming apart, not coming to pass. There are people who are not so well educated, and there are people who've had negative income growth for a very long time. And these are the people who are dying of drug overdoses, of alcohol overdoses, and who are killing themselves in very large numbers in middle age, enough to actually turn around the whole mortality profile of the United States in middle age. So bad things are happening, and it's not that inequality causes these things in any very, very direct way, but extreme inequality is making all of these things worse.
Right, we are nearing the end, and well, we are finished with questions, but Professor Deaton, if you'd like to make any last statement, the floor is yours. If not, we invite everyone to attend a reception for Professor Deaton at the Common Room at Rockefeller College. Just go out the main doors and basically follow the crowd. Again, that's at 2:30 this afternoon in 15 minutes at the Rocky Common Room. And let's give one more round of applause for our Nobel laureate in economics, Angus Deaton.